Welcome back, my night wanderers. Tonight we dim the lights and travel into the hushed candlelit corridors of the medieval world, a place of silence and shadows, of whispers carefully tucked into veils, and of secrets hidden beneath layers of wool and linen. This isn't the story of kings who ruled or knights who fought, but of women who carried mysteries within them, mysteries so quiet, so carefully guarded, that they managed to keep them alive for centuries. History often speaks loudly of men, of their wars, their thrones, their battles etched into stone. But women, their lives were lived behind curtains, within convent walls, in the kitchens, the birthing chambers, and the spinning rooms. They did not leave behind great monuments, but they did leave behind traces, faint as a perfume lingering on old parchment, or a pressed flower found between the pages of a forgotten book. And yet, these faint traces tell us something astonishing. Medieval women kept secrets, secrets of healing, of survival, of faith and rebellion, secrets they passed from hand to hand, whispered from grandmother to granddaughter, encoded in songs, symbols, charms and recipes, secrets that protected them in a world that gave them little power, yet demanded their silence. Tonight, you'll hear about these hidden worlds, about the herbal cures concealed in cookbooks, the coded prayers that were really protection spells, the underground networks of midwives, and the veiled truths about women's bodies that men in power often feared. So settle into your blankets. Listen as the echoes of their lives reach across centuries, not with clanging swords or booming voices, but with soft murmurs. Tonight, we uncover the shocking secrets medieval women carried, and how, in their quiet way, they shaped history as surely as any king or conqueror. And if you enjoy wandering through these hidden histories with me, remember to subscribe, so you never miss another midnight journey. Now, let's begin. The story begins in the herb gardens that dotted monasteries, manor houses, and village commons. Imagine the sight. Rows of sage and thyme, sprigs of lavender nodding in the wind, mint creeping along the edges of garden walls. These gardens weren't just for flavoring stews. For women especially, they were libraries of living knowledge. In an age before pharmacies, before hospitals as we know them, women carried within their hands the knowledge of healing. Much of it was practical. Chamomile to soothe, comfrey for wounds, fennel for digestion. But hidden within that practical knowledge was something more radical, a secret power. Why? Because this knowledge gave women control over pain, over fertility, over the mysteries of life and death. Mokelman. In a society where men held the official authority, priests over the soul, lords over the land, women quietly held dominion over the body, and that was no small thing. Consider the example of rue, a bitter herb with yellow flowers. Monks recorded it as useful for banishing melancholy and warding off evil spirits. But among women, passed quietly from midwife to mother, rue was whispered about as a way to bring on a late moon, a euphemism for inducing menstruation, and sometimes an early termination of pregnancy. This was a secret, and a dangerous one. A woman could never speak of it openly, not to a priest, not even to her husband in many cases. But among women, the knowledge was alive, carried in songs, in coded recipes, in the simple act of passing a sprig from one hand to another. Lavender, too, was more than perfume. It was protection. Sprigs were tucked into the folds of clothing, sewn into pillows, laid in the birthing chamber to calm both mother and child. The church might bless lavender as a holy scent, but women knew it was also a shield against sickness, and perhaps against something even darker. Envy, gossip, or curses from unfriendly neighbors. We see hints of these secrets in manuscripts like leech books and herbals, written by male scribes, who often copied remedies without fully understanding the women's traditions behind them. A recipe might read, "For a woman whose child lingers in the womb, take pennyroyal and brew it into a tea." To a monk, it was just an observation. To women, it was life or death knowledge, cloaked in everyday language. And yet, this knowledge was precarious. It lived not in libraries but in memory. Women could not openly publish or claim it. Instead, they disguised it. They might weave remedies into cooking recipes. Take sage and vinegar and thyme, and it will make the broth stronger. A domestic instruction that, in truth, was a healing tonic. Or they might encode it in charms. Sing this rhyme while boiling this herb, and it becomes more than food, it becomes medicine. What made this so shocking was not only the secrecy, but the defiance. In a society where the church insisted that healing came from prayer and relics, where physicians trained in universities dismissed women's remedies as old wives' tales, women quietly sustained their own tradition of medicine. It was folk knowledge, yes, but it was also deeply practical. It worked. And sometimes it was feared. The line between healer and witch was razor thin. A woman who healed too well, whose knowledge seemed too uncanny, might suddenly find herself accused of sorcery. And so, the secrecy deepened. The remedies became layered with prayer, or disguised as household chores. We find this secrecy even in lullabies. Songs sung to children in cradles were not always mere comfort. They carried coded words of protection, warding off the night hag, or the elf shot, terms for sickness or sudden infant death. A stranger might hear a soothing tune. A mother knew it was also a spell of survival. The most fascinating part is that this knowledge endured for centuries. Even as the medieval world gave way to the Renaissance, even as men like Paracelsus or Galen became authorities in medicine, women's herb lore remained a quiet, persistent undercurrent. In village after village, women kept tending their herb gardens, whispering to one another about which plants healed and which ones harmed. And if you listen closely today, you can still hear echoes of it. In the mint tea a grandmother insists will cure a stomachache. In the lavender sachet tucked beneath a pillow. In the chamomile tea for sleep. These are the faint survivors of a medieval secret, that women in their silence created a parallel system of care, hidden in plain sight. So the first secret medieval women kept, they were guardians of an invisible medicine, a medicine that gave them power over their bodies and their households. A medicine hidden so carefully that even as kings fell and dynasties ended, the knowledge endured, folded into the everyday lives of women who refused to let it die. And that's only the beginning. Because if women could control herbs, they could control something far more dangerous to medieval men, the mysteries of birth and life itself. Close your eyes and picture the medieval birthing chamber. It is not the polished, sterile environment of a modern hospital. It is dim, lit only by candles or a single rushlight. Heavy curtains or wooden shutters block out the outside world. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and herbs burning in a small brazier. Around the bed, women gather, the expectant mother, her mother or sisters, and most important of all, the midwife. The midwife is no ordinary woman. She carries with her knowledge that is both ancient and forbidden, both sacred and feared. Her hands know how to turn a breech child, how to use herbs to ease pain, how to cut a cord or deliver a placenta. She knows what words to whisper when a birth goes wrong, when the cries stop, when the mother's strength fades. She is the guardian of life at its most fragile threshold. But what made midwives powerful also made them dangerous in the eyes of the church and state. Birth was holy, life entering the world, the first breath of a new Christian soul. It was also perilous. For every safe birth there were tragedies, mothers who bled too much, children who failed to breathe, infections that no prayer could heal. And when things went wrong, suspicion often fell on the very women trusted to help. So how did midwives survive in this fragile position? The answer lies in networks, quiet, invisible chains of women passing secrets from one generation to the next. Unlike physicians who trained in universities and wrote treatises in Latin, midwives trained through apprenticeship. A young woman would shadow an older one, learning not through books but through hands-on experience, watching, listening, practicing. Over time she too became a keeper of secrets. And in this way, knowledge of childbirth spread not through libraries, but through whispered words in dark rooms. These networks stretched across villages, towns, even countries. Recipes for easing labor traveled in the form of charms or prayers. A verse to Saint Margaret of Antioch, patron saint of childbirth, recited while tying a belt around a laboring woman's waist. A drink of honey mixed with crushed rue leaves, passed as a tonic, but understood as something more. Sometimes, the secrets midwives kept were about timing. They knew when a pregnancy was viable, when it was not, and how to intervene. In a world where men dictated the rules of inheritance, property, and legitimacy, this knowledge gave women an underground power. A midwife could help a woman end a pregnancy quietly, or she could ensure that a child survived long enough to be baptized, so that even if it died, its soul was considered safe. This balance of spiritual and physical authority made midwives both indispensable and feared. The church often required midwives to swear oaths before bishops, promising never to use witchcraft or charms. But the truth was, many midwives did use charms. Some were prayers, some were fragments of pagan ritual, rebranded in Christian language. A blessing with salt and water, a whispered incantation over a candle, a cord tied in a particular knot. To the women present, these rituals were part of birth. To outsiders, they looked suspiciously like sorcery. And here lies one of the most shocking secrets medieval women kept. The art of childbirth was not only medical, but magical. We find evidence of this in strange places. In the margins of prayer books where women scribbled notes not about theology but about childbirth remedies. In amulets buried with women, containing scraps of parchment inscribed with holy names, carried during labor as protection. In folk songs that describe herbs gathered under the moonlight, or before the cock crows, instructions passed down in riddles. These weren't idle superstitions. They were survival strategies in a world where childbirth was one of the leading causes of death for women. A midwife's success meant the difference between life and death, between joy and despair. No wonder her knowledge was secretive, guarded, and often disguised as prayer. But secrecy was not only for protection from the church, it was also for protection from men. For to know too much about women's bodies was to unsettle the balance of power. Men claimed authority over law, land, and doctrine. Women claimed authority over life itself. Quietly, carefully, without leaving too many records. And perhaps the most astonishing part, these networks outlasted centuries of persecution. Even during the great witch hunts of the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, when midwives were among the first accused, the knowledge did not vanish. Women still whispered, still trained, still passed secrets behind closed doors. It is said that in some villages, when a girl was born, an older woman might whisper into her ear, "Remember, the blood of women carries power." It was a reminder that her body was not only a vessel of suffering, as priests might preach, but a vessel of life, guarded by secrets too dangerous to say aloud. So the second shocking secret medieval women kept was this: a hidden network of midwives, bound not by books or laws, but by whispers and rituals, sustaining the mysteries of birth, in a world that often feared them. And where birth begins, so too does another secret: the way women preserved their knowledge in stories, songs, and symbols, so that even if written words betrayed them, memory would not. Imagine a medieval village at dusk. Smoke curls from chimneys, the church bell tolls the hour, and women gather in small circles, spinning wool, preparing food, or rocking children to sleep. Their voices rise softly in song, simple and repetitive, the kind of melodies that linger in memory long after the words fade. To a passerby, these songs might sound like lullabies or work chants. To the women, they carried something deeper, coded knowledge, fragments of secrets too dangerous to say outright. This is one of the most overlooked truths about medieval women, the way they encoded their knowledge into the everyday, disguising wisdom as rhyme, instruction as song, and resistance as folklore. The power of the lullaby. Take the lullaby for example. "Hush, little one," a mother might sing, her voice carrying through a thatched cottage. But listen closely, and you'd hear more than comfort. Some lullabies contained protective charms, references to saints, animals, or natural forces believed to shield infants from harm. In England, one cradle song promised that "the night hag shall not ride thee." In parts of Germany, mothers sang of iron nails hammered into doorframes to keep away witches. These weren't just nursery rhymes, they were coded spells, performed in plain sight. And because lullabies were women's domain, sung in kitchens, cradles, and spinning rooms, they slipped beneath the notice of priests and scribes. What seemed like simple melody was, in fact, a secret survival language. Work songs as memory keepers beyond the cradle. Women used work songs to preserve and pass on practical knowledge. Spinning songs contained references to the best times of year to harvest flax. Baking songs described how to test yeast or flour. Herbal charms were woven into verses so they could be remembered and repeated without needing ink or parchment. A line like "gather by moonlight before cockcrow" wasn't poetic flourish. It was precise instruction. Memory, after all, was the safest vault for secrets. No inquisitor could burn what lived in your head, and no thief could steal a tune carried in your voice. Symbols and embroidery. But not all secrets lived in sound. Women also stitched them into fabric, painted them into margins, or carved them into household objects. Embroidery especially was a subtle canvas for coded messages. Consider the seemingly simple motifs of flowers and herbs stitched into altar cloths, veils, or household linens. A rose might symbolize love, but also secrecy. Rue or pennyroyal stitched into a border might not be decoration at all, but a reminder of hidden remedies. In convents, nuns sometimes embroidered images that blended biblical scenes with natural motifs, slipping in knowledge about plants or cycles of the moon. Even in the most controlled environments, women found ways to mark their presence through quiet symbols, the language of charms. One remarkable example of this coded tradition is the way women preserved healing charms. Because writing them down openly risked accusations of witchcraft, they were disguised as prayers. A charm to stop bleeding might begin with, "In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit," before shifting into instructions about pressing certain herbs or tying certain knots. To an outsider, it looked like piety. To those in the know, it was practical medicine. And these charms traveled. Across Europe, we find almost identical verses in different languages, hinting at a secret sisterhood of memory. How did a charm sung in France find its way into a village in England? Likely through women, wives, mothers, midwives, moving with husbands, dowries, or pilgrimages, carrying their oral traditions with them. Why secrecy was necessary? Why did women hide their knowledge this way? The answer is simple: survival. The medieval church was suspicious of anything that blurred the line between prayer and magic. A woman caught using charms or symbols risked being accused of witchcraft, especially if an illness worsened or a child died. Men in authority feared the idea of women controlling knowledge outside their oversight. So women adapted. They did not stop singing. They did not stop stitching. They did not stop whispering. They simply disguised their wisdom in ways invisible to outsiders. This perhaps is the most shocking part. Women turned their very marginalization into protection. Because their voices were considered unimportant, their songs and rhymes went unnoticed by men who might have silenced them. What was dismissed as old wives' tales or silly rhymes was in truth a vast archive of knowledge encoded in the everyday. The resilience of memory. And what's astonishing is how resilient this tradition proved. Long after medieval Europe gave way to the Renaissance and beyond, fragments of these songs and symbols survived. Modern nursery rhymes, for example, may contain echoes of medieval charms. Folklorists have traced lines about herbs, animals, and moons back to practices centuries old. The act of tucking lavender into pillows or sewing rosemary into wedding gowns may once have carried layers of meaning now forgotten. Every grandmother's remedy, every lullaby passed down without explanation, may be a faint echo of the secret survival codes medieval women once wove into daily life. A world of quiet defiance. So the third shocking secret medieval women kept was this: they created a hidden language of survival, preserved in song, symbol, and story. In a world where their written voices were rare and often censored, they made their memory a weapon, their creativity a shield. And perhaps the greatest irony is that these traditions survived precisely because they were underestimated. Men wrote chronicles of kings and wars, never realizing that women's songs carried something just as enduring: a map of survival, folded into rhyme. This language of secrecy, of songs, charms, and symbols, wasn't merely quaint, it was revolutionary. It meant women could remember, teach, and resist, without ever being caught. And from this foundation, their secrets deepened further. Because once you learn how to hide your knowledge, you learn how to hide something even greater: your inner life, your faith, and your resistance against the powers that sought to control you. In the medieval world, faith was everywhere. The toll of church bells marked the hours, sermons dictated morality, and monasteries loomed over villages like guardians of the soul. The church taught that salvation flowed through its priests, its sacraments, its rituals. To live outside its structures was to risk eternal damnation. And yet, beneath this towering authority, women carried their own faith, quieter, more personal, and often hidden. They shaped their spiritual lives in ways that slipped beneath the gaze of bishops and inquisitors. Their secrets were not only about herbs and healing, but about how they prayed, how they worshipped, and how they found God in places the church did not always approve. The spaces between. For many women, faith did not live in grand cathedrals, but in kitchens, gardens, and fields. They prayed while kneading bread, whispered Ave Marias over steaming pots, or wove psalms into spinning songs. These were not officially sanctioned liturgies, yet they were sacred. Women made chapels of their homes. A painted icon on a wall, a candle lit before childbirth, a cross etched into the dough before it rose in the oven. These gestures transformed the ordinary into holy space. What made this shocking was not the faith itself, but the independence of it. Women did not always wait for priests to bless or mediate. They blessed themselves, their children, their homes. It was a quiet assertion of spiritual agency, carried out beneath the notice of male authority. Saints as secret companions. Another secret of women's faith lay in their devotion to saints, especially female ones. Saints like Margaret of Antioch, who burst from the belly of a dragon and became the patroness of childbirth, or Saint Bridget of Ireland, whose legends mixed Christian piety with echoes of ancient goddess traditions. Women prayed to these saints not only for intercession, but as companions, figures who understood their struggles, their bodies, their fears. Stories of saints' miracles often circulated orally, retold in kitchens and weaving rooms, adapted to the needs of women who heard them. A saint who cured infertility in one tale might, in another, ease the pains of childbirth. A saint who escaped an unwanted marriage became a model for resisting male control. These saints became part of women's underground spirituality, holy figures reshaped to reflect women's hidden lives. Mystics and visionaries. Some women took this secret faith even further, becoming mystics whose visions challenged the boundaries of church authority. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen or Julian of Norwich are celebrated today. But in their own time, their writings carried dangerous implications that women could hear directly from God, without priestly mediation. Not all women mystics were recognized. Many lived and died anonymously, their visions carried only in whispers among neighbors. Some claimed to see saints in their kitchens, angels by their bedsides, or visions of Christ while spinning wool. These experiences, though unrecorded, shaped a culture of underground spirituality, where women claimed direct access to the divine. The shocking secret here was not that women had faith, but that they claimed ownership of it. Their spirituality was not entirely controlled by priests. It was woven into their daily lives, their stories, their communities. Holy objects and hidden charms. Women also carried faith in objects, some blessed, some not. A rosary bead tucked into a pocket, a relic of a saint, sometimes no more than a scrap of cloth touched to a shrine, hidden beneath a pillow. But along with official relics, women used charms that blurred the line between religion and magic. A string of knots tied while reciting the Lord's Prayer. A piece of bread marked with a cross, eaten for protection. A parchment with sacred words, worn as an amulet during childbirth. To outsiders these looked like superstitions. To women, they were acts of faith, secret liturgies that merged the holy with the practical. Pilgrimages in secret. Some women even undertook pilgrimages, not always to distant shrines, but to local holy wells, springs, and groves. They slipped away to pour water, tie ribbons to trees, or leave offerings at sacred spots. Many of these places had pagan origins, later absorbed into Christian tradition, but women preserved them as sites of personal devotion. A priest might bless a well as holy water. A woman might whisper her private prayer there, asking for fertility, healing, or protection. In these spaces, faith was intimate, unmediated, and often invisible to male authority. Faith as resistance. Perhaps the most radical aspect of women's hidden faith was its quiet resistance. By shaping spirituality in ways that met their needs, women carved out a sacred space for themselves in a world that gave them little power. The church often portrayed women as spiritually weak, prone to sin, in need of male guidance. But women's lived practices told another story. They showed resilience, creativity, and a refusal to surrender the deepest parts of themselves to outside control. The shocking secret here is that women's faith was not always obedient. It was adaptive, independent, and sometimes quietly rebellious. The legacy. We see traces of this underground spirituality even today. In folk Catholicism, where saints and charms blend seamlessly. In family traditions where candles are lit for ancestors, or bread is marked with a cross before baking. These are the lingering echoes of medieval women's secret faith, still alive centuries later. So the fourth secret medieval women kept was this: a hidden world of faith that existed alongside the official church, shaped not by priests but by mothers, grandmothers, and daughters. A faith that was quiet but powerful, personal but enduring. And from this hidden faith emerged something equally profound: the ability of women to preserve their voices in writing, not openly, but in ways that slipped beneath the notice of those who would silence them. In the medieval world, writing was power. The chronicles of kings, the sermons of priests, the charters of lords. These were the documents that shaped history. And almost all of them were written by men. Women, it seemed, were voiceless in ink. But the truth is more complicated. Women did write, though rarely in ways recognized by official historians. Their voices survive not in great chronicles but in letters, prayers, recipes, and even the margins of manuscripts. And within these small, fragile traces lies a shocking secret. Women used writing to preserve themselves, to slip past silence, and to carry truths the world was not meant to hear. Letters from the margins. Let us begin with letters. In noble households, women often managed estates while husbands were away at war, or in service to their lords. This required correspondence, notes to tenants, petitions to officials, instructions to stewards. Many such letters survive, written in firm, practical hands. One might read, "To my faithful servant, see that the harvest is gathered before the rains." On the surface, it is household management, but between the lines lies something more, an assertion of authority. In a world where women were supposed to be silent, here was a woman giving orders, commanding resources, shaping daily life. Some letters went further. Noble women petitioned kings for justice, defended their children's inheritance, or complained bitterly about mistreatment. These letters reveal sharp minds and strong voices, preserved in ink despite centuries of neglect. But letters were not only the domain of the nobility. In towns, literate women wrote to family members, often in tender, personal tones. A mother might send news of a child's illness. A sister might share household remedies. These letters were not meant for public record, but they reveal a world of female communication that slipped beneath the surface of official history. Prayers and spiritual texts. Women also wrote prayers, some copied from priests, others composed themselves. In prayer books we find notes scribbled in the margins. "Pray for my husband's soul. Protect my daughter in childbirth." These small insertions reveal personal concerns, woven into texts that otherwise followed the church's strict formulas. Some women composed entire spiritual works. Julian of Norwich, for instance, wrote her Revelations of Divine Love, a text so radical in its depiction of God's compassion that it still astonishes readers today. But countless unnamed women also recorded visions, confessions, and prayers that circulated quietly among communities. The shocking secret here is that women did not simply consume religion. They reshaped it in writing, embedding their experiences in texts meant to outlast them. Recipes as disguise. Another form of writing women used was the recipe book. At first glance, these were simple household manuals, instructions for cooking, preserving, or brewing. But hidden among the recipes for pies and stews were remedies for illness, instructions for easing childbirth, and even subtle references to reproductive control. A recipe might read, "Take pennyroyal and mix with honey to make the womb light." To a casual reader, it was an odd household remedy. To women, it was a coded instruction for ending an unwanted pregnancy. By disguising medical knowledge as kitchen writing, women preserved their secrets in plain sight. These recipe books became libraries of female wisdom, carried across generations, disguised as mere domestic manuals. The margins of manuscripts. Perhaps the most fascinating traces of women's voices lie in the margins of manuscripts. Medieval books were precious, often owned by monasteries or wealthy households. And yet, women sometimes left their mark. A name scrawled in the corner, a prayer for a child, even a doodle of flowers or animals. One famous example comes from a 14th century psalter, owned by a noblewoman. In the margins, she scribbled personal notes, complaints about her husband, prayers for her children, and even little sketches. These were not official entries, but they preserved her presence in a book otherwise filled with male-authored psalms. Such marginalia remind us that women found ways to insert themselves into texts even when denied formal authorship. Their words lived in the spaces between, in the cracks of manuscripts where authority looked the other way. Diaries and hidden testimonies. Though rare, a few women kept diaries. In convents, nuns recorded their daily struggles, their doubts, their small triumphs. These texts often reveal a raw honesty, absent from official chronicles, confessions of fear, loneliness, even resentment of strict rules. One nun wrote of secretly sneaking extra food to the poor, another confessed to longing for the world outside the cloister walls. These were not meant for public eyes, yet they offer a startlingly human glimpse into women's inner lives. Why the secrecy? Why did women write this way? In margins, in recipes, in disguised forms? The answer is the same as with herbs, charms, and songs: survival. Official history had no space for women's voices. Priests and scholars dismissed them as unlearned, emotional, unreliable. But women refused silence. They found ways to write around the edges, to preserve themselves in fragments. This secrecy also offered protection. A recipe could be dismissed as harmless. A marginal note might go unnoticed. A prayer could be mistaken for piety. Within these disguises, women's true voices endured. The legacy of hidden writing today, scholars are uncovering more and more of these hidden texts. What once seemed like marginal scribbles are now recognized as crucial records of women's lives. Recipes once dismissed as old wives' remedies are studied as important medical traditions. Letters once overlooked are valued as rare glimpses into female authority. The shocking secret of women's writing is that it was everywhere, just not in the forms men thought mattered. Women did not need chronicles to leave their mark. They left themselves in letters, in prayers, in margins, in recipes. Their words slipped past silence, surviving centuries of neglect. So the fifth secret medieval women kept was this. Their voices lived in hidden texts, waiting for us to listen. And from ink and paper, we move to something just as powerful, silence itself. For sometimes, what medieval women did not say was its own form of secret power. History often equates silence with absence. If women did not leave great speeches or chronicles, it is assumed they had little to say. But what if silence itself was a weapon? What if it was one of the most carefully guarded secrets medieval women carried? Silence for women in the Middle Ages was not always submission. It could be strategy. It could be survival. And in some cases, it could be power. Silence as protection. Imagine the world they lived in. A world where an accusation of gossip could stain a woman's reputation, where a whispered word about herbs or charms might lead to charges of witchcraft, where speaking against authority, husband, priest, or lord, could invite punishment. In this environment, silence became armor. A woman who held her tongue could avoid suspicion. A woman who concealed her knowledge, about remedies, about pregnancies, about private conversations, could protect not only herself but her family. Midwives, for instance, were often sworn to secrecy about what they witnessed in birthing chambers. The silence of a midwife could protect the reputation of a noblewoman, conceal the paternity of a child, or hide the use of forbidden remedies. This silence was not weakness. It was a secretive form of loyalty and survival. The gossip stigma. The church and secular authorities feared women's speech. Sermons warned against idle chatter and loose tongues, especially among women. The stereotype of the gossiping wife or neighbor was not just a joke, it was a mechanism of control. To accuse a woman of gossip was to strip her credibility, to mark her as dangerous. But women were not simply passive under these accusations. Many turned silence into a deliberate shield. Better to remain quiet, better to withhold words, than to risk them being twisted into weapons. Thus, silence became a secret language of its own, a refusal to expose, a refusal to betray. Silence in convents, inside convent walls, silence was also ritualized. Nuns observed periods of holy silence, refraining from speech except in prayer. Yet even here, silence carried multiple meanings. It could be obedience, yes, but it could also be protest. When abbesses resisted outside interference, they sometimes did so by withholding words, refusing to respond to intrusive bishops, refusing to confess private visions. Silence became a form of quiet defiance, an assertion that some truths were not for male ears. The secrets of the body. Perhaps the most profound silences were those surrounding women's bodies. Men wrote medical treatises about the mysteries of the womb, but women rarely explained their own experiences. Men puzzled over menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause. Women endured these realities mostly in silence. This was not ignorance, it was deliberate. By keeping their embodied knowledge within female circles, women maintained a secret domain men could never fully penetrate. Silence guarded the mysteries of fertility and birth as surely as any locked door. Silence, as storytelling. But silence was not only the absence of speech, it could also shape storytelling. In folktales and legends, women's voices often appear as whispers, hints, or unnamed figures. A story might speak of a woman who knew a secret, without ever revealing her name. This anonymity was its own protection, allowing stories to circulate without betraying their sources. Even in official chronicles, women sometimes appear as anonymous informants or a certain wife of the town. Their names are lost, but their silences preserved them. They lived in shadows, shaping history without stepping into the glare of public record. The hidden meaning of silence. In a world that expected women to be silent, Choosing silence might seem like submission. But when we look closer, we see something more deliberate. Silence allowed women to control what was known and what was not. It gave them the power to guard secrets, to protect others, and to shape narratives by what they withheld. Think of the countless secrets that died with medieval women, secrets of love affairs, of hidden remedies, of whispered rebellions. These silences were not failures of record, but acts of protection. They remind us that absence in history does not always mean absence in reality. Silence is legacy. And here lies the most shocking truth. Silence itself was a kind of secret archive. Unlike letters that could be confiscated, or songs that could be overheard, silence left nothing for inquisitors to burn. It was the one form of resistance that could never be erased. We see echoes of this even today. Families sometimes carry unspoken stories, of miscarriages, of forbidden loves, of private struggles, that were never written down but live in the hush between generations. This legacy of silence stretches back to medieval women, who understood that some truths survive best when never spoken at all. The sixth secret. So the sixth shocking secret medieval women kept was not something they said or wrote, but something they withheld. They mastered silence, turning it into armor, into protest, into power. They carried truths they never revealed, shaping history in ways invisible to the chroniclers of their time. And from silence, we move to another secret realm, women's bodies and beauty. For just as silence concealed truths, so too did cosmetics, clothing, and rituals of adornment hide deeper realities of women's lives. When we think of medieval women, the image that often comes to mind is one of modesty. Veiled heads, long gowns, a life shaped by duty rather than vanity. But beneath that image lies another truth. Medieval women carried shocking secrets about their bodies, their beauty, and the rituals they performed in private. These were not simply matters of vanity, they were matters of survival, desire, and even power. Beauty as armor. In a society where women's value was often judged by appearance, by the fairness of their skin, the richness of their clothing, the smoothness of their hair, beauty could be a weapon. A carefully painted face or a scented veil was more than adornment, it was a way of navigating a dangerous world. But cosmetics carried risks. Many of the substances women used were toxic. Lead-based powders to whiten the skin, mercury to brighten the complexion, herbs and oils that could cause burns or illness. Still, women used them, guarding their recipes as closely as midwives guarded their remedies. Whitened skin, for example, was not only fashionable, it was symbolic. Pale flesh marked one as noble, untouched by outdoor labor. Women who achieved this effect with powders and washes were, in a sense, painting their social identity onto their faces. The shocking secret was that this identity was constructed, not innate. Hidden recipes of cosmetics. These beauty secrets were often passed in the same way as medical knowledge, through whispered recipes. Manuscripts occasionally reveal them, but more often they lived in memory. A common recipe for making the face fair included vinegar, egg whites, and powdered lead. Another suggested rubbing pig's fat mixed with herbs. Some women used crushed pearls or ground alabaster, substances both expensive and dangerous. Hair, too, was a site of secrecy. Blonde hair was highly prized, seen as angelic and pure. Women who were not naturally fair used secret rinses of saffron, lye, or even urine to lighten their locks. Such practices were rarely spoken of openly, yet they reveal how far women would go to shape the image demanded by society. Perfumes were another layer of this hidden world. While the church often condemned excessive scent as vanity, women knew that fragrance could mask the odors of unwashed bodies in a time when bathing was infrequent. Scent was not only luxury, it was camouflage. Sachets of lavender, rosewater rinses, pomanders filled with herbs, all were secrets worn close to the body. The ritual of dressing clothing itself carried secrets. A gown might look simple to outsiders, but beneath layers of wool or silk, women often wore charms sewn into seams, protective herbs stitched into hems, or relics tucked into girdles. Corset-like bodices shaped the body into desirable forms, while veils concealed hair but also created mystery. To the outside world, modesty was enforced. To women themselves, these layers became a canvas of hidden meanings: protection, attraction, even defiance. Cosmetics and religion. The church often frowned on cosmetics, warning that women who painted their faces were tools of the devil, luring men into sin. Yet women persisted. Why? Because cosmetics gave them agency in a world that otherwise controlled their bodies. To paint one's face was to claim authorship of it, to transform appearance on one's own terms. In this sense, cosmetics were more than decoration. They were quiet rebellion. Some women even disguised cosmetics as piety. Rosewater could be presented as a holy cleansing. Scented oils could be linked to biblical anointing. By cloaking beauty rituals in religious imagery, women preserved their secrets without censure. Menstrual secrets, another shocking aspect of bodily secrecy, was the way women managed menstruation. Medieval medical texts written by men were filled with speculation, strange theories about the dangers of menstrual blood, fears that it could wither crops or sour wine. But women themselves, of course, knew the reality. They developed practical methods of coping: cloth rags washed and reused, herbal teas to ease cramps, charms for irregular cycles. These practices were rarely recorded in writing, but they were shared among women, passed in whispers like the other secrets of the body. Silence on this subject was deliberate. To speak openly invited ridicule or suspicion. Instead, women created a hidden culture of care around their cycles, one almost invisible to history but absolutely vital to their lives. Pregnancy and beauty. Pregnancy, too, carried its own hidden rituals. While men wrote endlessly about heirs and inheritance, women knew the bodily truth of carrying children. They used cosmetics to mask fatigue, perfumes to cover the scent of illness, and special diets to protect themselves and the unborn. One recipe advised pregnant women to, quote, bathe the face with milk and rosewater to keep fair despite swelling. Another suggested carrying amulets against miscarriage. These practices reveal how women combined beauty, medicine, and superstition into a single secretive system. The shocking truth of bodily autonomy. The most startling revelation in all of this is that medieval women did not passively accept their bodies as dictated by men's texts. They actively shaped them. Through cosmetics, clothing, perfumes, and rituals, they constructed identities, managed perceptions, and carved out private spaces of control. The secrets of beauty were not trivial. They were strategies of survival, in a world where a woman's appearance could determine her marriage, her security, even her safety. Echoes today. We might still glimpse traces of these secrets in modern life. The ritual of makeup, the perfume spritz before leaving the house, the hidden talismans women carry for luck or protection, all of these echo medieval practices. What we see as personal style may, in fact, be the faint inheritance of centuries of secret rituals of the body. The seventh secret. So the seventh shocking secret medieval women kept was this: behind veils and powders, beneath layers of fabric and fragrance, they used beauty not as vanity but as power. They hid rituals of survival in cosmetics, perfumes, and clothing. They shaped their identities in ways men could not control. And from here, the story grows even darker. For while beauty was a hidden tool, so too was knowledge of poisons, charms, and substances that could harm as well as heal. The next secret leads us into that shadowed realm, the dangerous knowledge women carried, whispered in fear and fascination. We have already seen how medieval women kept secret knowledge of herbs, for healing, for easing pain, for aiding childbirth. But what happens when those same herbs, those same whispers of wisdom, are turned toward darker purposes? Here we step into one of the most shocking secret realms of all, the dangerous knowledge women carried about poisons and forbidden remedies. Knowledge that could heal a life or end one. Knowledge that could make women both indispensable and feared. The thin line between medicine and poison. In the medieval world, the line between medicine and poison was razor thin. Many plants could cure in small doses and kill in larger ones. Henbane, for example, was used to dull pain and induce sleep, but too much could bring madness or death. Foxglove was prized for its effect on the heart, but a few extra drops could still the pulse forever. Women who worked with herbs knew this. Midwives, healers, and wise women had to balance carefully between remedy and danger. Their skill lay not only in knowing what healed, but how much was safe. To outsiders, this knowledge looked suspicious. How could one woman know so much about plants, unless she trafficked in witchcraft? And so, the secrecy deepened. Remedies were disguised in household recipes, coded in songs, hidden in memory. But everyone in the village knew. A woman with such knowledge could cure you, or curse you. Rumors of poisoners' whispers about women as poisoners circulated widely in the Middle Ages. Chronicles tell of queens accused of slipping venom into goblets, of wives suspected when husbands died suddenly, of servants whispered about when illness spread. Were these stories true? Sometimes, perhaps. More often they reveal the fear men held of women's secret knowledge. Because if a woman could heal unseen, then surely she could kill unseen. In Italy, women were sometimes accused of carrying acqua tofana, a fabled poison disguised as holy water or perfume. In France, stories circulated of women who used powdered herbs to rid themselves of cruel husbands. Whether myth or truth, these tales reveal the same suspicion: that women's herbal lore gave them a hidden, lethal power. Forbidden remedies. Some forbidden remedies had nothing to do with malice but with control over reproduction. Herbs like pennyroyal, rue and savin were whispered about as ways to bring on the moon when it was late. In modern terms, they were abortifacients. For women in desperate circumstances, facing poverty, shame or danger, these remedies were lifelines. But to church and state, they were crimes. Terminating a pregnancy was treated as sin, even heresy. And yet, women passed these recipes in secret, risking their lives to help each other. This was one of the most carefully guarded secrets of all: that women had ways of controlling their fertility long before modern medicine. They never wrote these recipes down openly. They lived in whispered codes, in recipes disguised as teas, in charms disguised as prayers. Poisons in the court. Even in noble courts, rumors of poison swirled. Queens and noblewomen, denied open political power, were sometimes accused of wielding poison as a hidden weapon. Isabella of France, Catherine de' Medici, Lucrezia Borgia, all were accused, in their lifetimes or after, of poisoning rivals. Some of these charges were propaganda, born of fear of powerful women, but the fact that people believed them shows how strong the association was. Women's secret knowledge of plants and potions equaled danger. Perfume flasks, jewelry, even rings were said to conceal deadly powders. Whether real or imagined, these stories reveal how women's proximity to domestic spaces, kitchens, still rooms, private chambers, made them suspects in the realm of poison. The fear of the wise woman in villages. The wise woman, or healer, was both revered and feared. People sought her out when physicians failed, when children were sick, when crops withered. But if she cured too well, or if she refused help, whispers could turn against her. She knows too much, neighbors might say. Her herbs are not holy. And if a sudden death followed, suspicion pointed her way. Many of the women later accused of witchcraft in the great persecutions of the 15th and 16th centuries had long been midwives or herbalists. Their secret knowledge of plants, so carefully preserved, was rebranded as evidence of consorting with the devil. The shocking secret, then, was not only that women knew how to heal, but that they also knew how to harm, and that this knowledge terrified the men who sought to control them. Coded recipes and memory. How did women preserve this dangerous knowledge without being caught? Through code. A recipe might read: for a stubborn sickness, steep rue in hot water, and give to the sufferer. A harmless note, unless one knew that in larger doses, rue could end a pregnancy. Another recipe might describe an oil to soothe pain, made from poppy seeds, an oil that, in excess, could lull someone into never waking. By disguising remedies in ordinary language, women preserved them across generations. Memory did the rest. A daughter would watch her mother prepare a tea for women's troubles, and years later repeat it without ever writing it down. In this way, the most forbidden secrets lived on, invisible to inquisitors. The dual role of healer and threat. This double-edged knowledge gave women a paradoxical role in medieval society. They were healers, indispensable to communities. Yet they were also potential threats, suspected of harboring poisons in their kitchens, charms in their prayers. This suspicion reveals something deeper: fear of women's autonomy. For to admit that women could both heal and harm was to admit that they had a power outside men's control. And that was perhaps the most dangerous secret of all. Echoes in folklore. Folklore preserves this tension. Stories of witches brewing potions in cauldrons are echoes of real women brewing remedies. Tales of stepmothers poisoning apples are exaggerations of household suspicion. Even the archetype of the dangerous sorceress, Medea, Circe, Morgan Le Fay, reflects an ancient unease about women with secret knowledge of herbs. These stories are not simply fantasy, they are cultural memory of the fear, and the fascination, that medieval people held toward women's dangerous knowledge. The eighth shocking secret medieval women kept was this: they carried knowledge of poisons and forbidden remedies. They knew how to heal, but also how to harm. They preserved this knowledge in whispers and codes, passing it down despite persecution. And as we move forward, we see that this dangerous knowledge did not stand alone. It was part of a larger hidden system, a network of women supporting one another, through herbs, songs, letters, and silence. A sisterhood that spanned centuries. When we look at medieval history from the outside, it often seems as though women lived in isolation, each bound to her home, her husband, her children, her duties. But when we look closer, when we peer into kitchens, into weaving rooms, into the hushed gatherings at wells and markets, we see something different. We see networks. We see a sisterhood. We see women quietly bound together by secrets, by shared knowledge, by whispered solidarity. This sisterhood was one of the most shocking, yet invisible realities of the Middle Ages. While men forged alliances through war, politics, and treaties, women wove alliances through trust, through exchange, through secrets carried hand to hand. The marketplace is a network. Consider the village market. On its surface, it was a place for trade, eggs for cloth, herbs for meat, bread for ale. But listen more closely, and you'd hear another kind of commerce. Women exchanged news, recipes, remedies. They spoke of who was ill, who was pregnant, who needed help. In these small exchanges, women wove networks of survival. A market conversation could be the difference between life and death, passing along a recipe to ease fever, a charm for childbirth, or a warning about sickness in the next town. Men might see only chatter. Women knew it was strategy. The spinning room. Another hub of solidarity was the spinning room. Women gathered in groups to spin wool or flax, their hands busy, their voices free. Here they told stories, sang songs, shared secrets. The spinning room was a classroom, a confessional, and a parliament, all in one. Older women passed knowledge to younger ones: how to manage husbands, how to cope with childbirth, how to use herbs safely. Younger women shared gossip, laughter, and anxieties. Together, they built a collective memory, a living library of women's wisdom. It is no accident that spinning is so often associated with fate in folklore, the fates spinning the thread of life. In medieval reality, women spinning together were spinning the fabric of community, weaving themselves into a web of survival. Godmothers and kinship. The system of godparenthood also created female networks. A godmother was not just a ceremonial figure at baptism. She was often a lifelong supporter, a second mother, a protector of the child and of the mother herself. These ties formed webs of obligation and care that went far beyond blood family. Through godmotherhood, women created bonds that stretched across households, linking them in invisible solidarity. And through these ties, secrets traveled. A godmother might share an herbal remedy with her goddaughter, or help conceal a pregnancy, or offer shelter in time of need. Midwives as community anchors. We've already seen how midwives guarded dangerous knowledge, but they also anchored these networks. A midwife might attend dozens of births in a village, becoming a confidant to nearly every woman there. She carried secrets of lineage, of paternity, of survival, and she knew how to use silence to protect them. The midwife's authority was built not only on her skills, but on the trust of this sisterhood. She was the one women turned to when no one else could be trusted. Convents as women's communities. Not all sisterhoods were secular. Convents created formal communities of women bound together, often for life. Within convent walls, nuns shared not only spiritual life, but also practical support. Teaching, healing, writing. While priests might oversee them from outside, inside the cloister, women often ruled themselves. Abbesses wielded authority over estates, finances, and discipline. Nuns educated girls, preserved texts, and wrote their own. These convents were female networks as powerful as any male guild. And like their secular sisters, they preserved secrets, visions, spiritual practices, even coded critiques of male authority, shared only within the safety of the cloister. The power of gossip, reconsidered what men condemned as gossip, was in truth one of women's greatest survival tools. Gossip was information sharing. It told women who was trustworthy, who was cruel, who might be dangerous. It spread warnings about abusive husbands, corrupt priests, or outbreaks of disease. Yes, gossip could harm, but it could also protect. And in a world where women had little official power, gossip was an underground network of knowledge. Shared labor, shared secrets. Even the act of working side by side created solidarity. In fields, in kitchens, at looms, women talked. Their labor was physical, but their words wove invisible threads. They might whisper about remedies, about their bodies, about hidden fears. They might tell each other stories of saints or fairies, blurring the line between religion and folklore. These conversations rarely left records. Men did not write them down. But they lived in memory, carried across generations. The shock of solidarity. What makes this so shocking? is that it reveals a hidden counterbalance to male authority. Men may have ruled in public, but women ruled in private networks. They created safety nets of knowledge, care, and loyalty that sustained them in ways official structures could not. This solidarity even extended to resistance. There are records of women banding together to protect one another from accusations of witchcraft, to shield each other from abusive lords, even to riot in markets against unfair prices. In these moments, the sisterhood stepped into the open, revealing the power that lay beneath the surface all along. The ninth secret. So the ninth shocking secret medieval women kept was this: they were not isolated. They built vast, invisible networks of solidarity, through markets, spinning rooms, godmotherhood, midwives, convents, and gossip. These networks carried secrets of survival, binding women together in ways men rarely saw, and from this solidarity, another secret emerged: the power of storytelling. For through stories, tales of saints, of witches, of clever wives, women encoded their experiences, their warnings, and their wisdom. Stories became another layer of secrecy, a way to speak without being heard too directly. If history books were written by kings and monks, then folklore was written by everyone else, most of all by women. For in kitchens, around hearths, in spinning rooms and cradles, women told stories. And those stories carried more than entertainment. They carried memory. They carried warnings. They carried secrets. This is perhaps one of the most shocking truths of all. Medieval women preserved their hidden knowledge in myths, legends, and folk tales, disguising wisdom as wonder. Folklore, as a veiled history. When women told fairy tales, they were not only amusing children, they were encoding the realities of their world. A story about a girl locked in a tower by a cruel stepmother might echo the experience of arranged marriage or confinement. The tale of a clever maiden who outwits a king might disguise anxieties about power and survival. A witch in the woods, both feared and sought out, reflects the dual role of wise women in villages. These were not random tales. They were repositories of lived experience, passed in forms that survived because they could be dismissed as just stories. The double image of the witch. Consider the figure of the witch. To men writing sermons, witches were agents of the devil. But in women's folklore, the witch was more complicated. She could be dangerous, yes, but she could also be wise. She lived outside society, unbound by men's rules. She knew herbs, charms, and secrets others did not. In this way, the witch was both a warning and a symbol of possibility. For women who listened, the witch embodied the risks of stepping outside prescribed roles, but also the hidden strength that came with knowledge. Fairies, saints, and female figures. Other tales preserved women's secrets in more subtle ways. Stories of fairy women, for example, often revolved around bargains and conditions. I will help you, but do not ask my name. Or, do not strike me, or I will vanish. These reflect women's experiences of conditional power, of survival through careful negotiation. Even saints' legends, retold by women, often bore traces of lived female struggles. Saint Margaret bursting from the dragon's belly was not only a miracle story, it was a symbolic tale of surviving childbirth. Saint Bridget transforming water into beer was not just a marvel, it was a reflection of women's role in brewing, a craft tied to survival and ritual. Storytelling in women's spaces. Where did these stories live? In women's spaces. The cradle, where lullabies wove myth with protection. The spinning room, where tales filled the long hours of labor. The marketplace, where gossip slid easily into legend. These were the true archives of women's knowledge, oral, fluid, and secretive. A girl listening to her grandmother's tale was learning not only entertainment but also coded lessons. Beware of strangers, trust your wit, keep your secrets. Folklore as resistance. Perhaps the most radical function of women's storytelling was resistance. When women could not openly challenge authority, they told tales that mocked it. The clever maid who outsmarts the king. The wife who tricks her domineering husband. The crone who knows more than the priest. These figures were not accidents. They were reflections of quiet defiance, encoded in safe, fictional form. In telling these stories, women preserved an alternative worldview, one in which they were not always powerless, one in which wit and wisdom triumphed over brute strength. The oral tradition as secret archive. The beauty of oral tradition is that it leaves no paper trail. Authorities could confiscate letters, burn manuscripts, or ban books, but they could not silence a grandmother whispering a story to a child. This is why folklore was such a powerful secret archive. It preserved the memory of women's experiences without ever appearing in official records. We see its endurance today. Many fairy tales collected in the 18th and 19th centuries bear traces of medieval origins, passed down through centuries of women's voices. Their survival is testament to the resilience of this hidden archive. Dangerous stories. Of course, stories could also be dangerous. A tale told too boldly might draw suspicion. Some women were accused of witchcraft simply for sharing charms or strange tales. To survive, they often cloaked their stories in innocence, disguising wisdom as entertainment. A riddle about herbs could be passed as a children's game. A tale about a fairy's bargain could disguise a lesson about childbirth or sexuality. In this way, women's stories walked a delicate line between revelation and concealment. Echoes in modern tales. Even today, echoes of these medieval secrets remain in our folklore. Little Red Riding Hood contains warnings about predatory men. Rapunzel reflects anxieties about confinement and fertility. Hansel and Gretel recalls fears of famine and abandonment, realities women managed in their daily lives. What we think of as fairy tales are, in truth, coded survival lessons passed through centuries of women's voices. The 10th secret so the 10th shocking secret medieval women kept was this. They preserved their hidden knowledge in stories, myths, and folklore. They created secret archives in oral tradition, disguising lessons as entertainment, resistance as legend. Through tales of witches, saints, and clever maids, they carried warnings, wisdom, and solidarity across generations. Their stories were not merely fictions, they were survival maps, encoded in narrative. And from stories we turn to the body again, not in beauty this time, but in suffering. For another secret medieval women carried was how they endured illness, pain, and death, in ways rarely recorded, shaping rituals of care and mourning that lived outside official texts. To understand the full depth of medieval women's hidden lives, we must step into the places where suffering lingered the longest. The sickbed, the deathbed, the spaces where bodies failed and where official structures of medicine and religion were often powerless. Men wrote about illness in medical treatises, filled with theories of humors and astrology. Priests wrote about death in sermons, reminding the faithful of judgment and hellfire. But women, they carried their own secret practices, rituals of care, of mourning, of survival, that were rarely written down but passed from hand to hand in whispered traditions. The women at the sickbed. When illness struck a medieval household, it was usually women who took charge. Wives, mothers, daughters, tending to fevers, preparing poultices, watching through long nights. Physicians might be summoned in wealthy homes, but for the majority, healing began and ended with women. Their knowledge of herbs, teas, and poultices was part of it. But so were the rituals that accompanied them. Whispered prayers, charms tied to bedposts, candles lit at certain hours. These were the soft practices that men dismissed, but women relied upon. To the sick, they offered more than medicine. They offered comfort, presence, the sense of being cared for, by someone who knew both the body and the soul. Rituals of protection. Women also carried secret rituals of protection during illness. Iron scissors placed under the bed to ward off evil spirits. Psalms whispered 3 times into a cup of water before giving it to drink. Knots tied into threads, each one representing a prayer. These rituals blurred the line between faith and superstition. To outsiders they might look like magic. To women they were simply what had to be done to keep loved ones safe, the silence of suffering. But just as important as what women did was what they did not say. Illness carried stigma, especially if it was chronic or mysterious. Families often concealed the true extent of sickness to protect reputations. Women were the keepers of these silences. They might mask the signs of a husband's weakness, quietly manage a child's long illness, or hide their own suffering behind daily labor. These silences were their own kind of secret, protecting dignity in a world that judged harshly. Deathbeds and women's presence. When death came, and it came often in the Middle Ages, it was again women who surrounded the dying. They closed the eyes, washed the body, dressed it for burial. These acts were more than chores, they were rituals of immense spiritual weight. To wash the dead was to purify them for their journey. To dress them carefully was to honor their life. Women did this work with a mixture of practicality and reverence, holding secrets of mourning that rarely appeared in chronicles. Keening and mourning. In some regions, women carried traditions of keening, wailing songs performed at funerals. These songs, often improvised, gave voice to grief in ways that sermons did not. They named the dead, recounted their lives, expressed sorrow and rage. Authorities often disapproved, seeing keening as disorderly, even pagan. But women continued, preserving these mourning songs as part of their secret culture. In them, grief became communal, and silence was broken in ritual cries. The midwives' other role. Midwives did not only preside over births, they also attended deaths. Their presence at life's threshold extended to its end. Some were called upon to comfort the dying, to prepare bodies, even to ensure infants who died in childbirth received baptism before passing. This double role gave midwives unique authority. They knew the secrets of both beginnings and endings, holding knowledge that was at once sacred and dangerous. The secret of women's own suffering. And then there was the suffering women carried within themselves. Chronic pain from repeated childbirths, illness from untreated infections, injuries from labor that went unrecorded because they were too common. Men wrote about great plagues and noble deaths. Women carried the unspoken knowledge of everyday suffering. They shared remedies quietly: how to ease prolapse, how to soothe fevers after childbirth, how to live with bodies worn down by endless labor. This suffering was rarely written, but it was shared. Mothers taught daughters what to expect, what to endure, how to survive. These were the hidden legacies of pain, carried in silence but alive in memory. Why these secrets mattered? Why keep these rituals secret? Partly because they were dismissed by male authorities, who saw them as superstition. Partly because they blurred the boundaries of religion, medicine, and magic, but mostly because they belonged to women. These rituals were theirs, not men's. They offered control in moments when life seemed uncontrollable. They gave dignity to suffering, voice to grief, comfort to the dying. The 11th secret. So the 11th shocking secret medieval women kept was this: they held hidden rituals of illness and death. They cared for the sick with remedies and prayers, guarded silences around suffering, and transformed death into a sacred act through mourning traditions. These secrets remind us that history is not only about kings and wars, it is also about the quiet hands that held the dying, the whispered prayers that eased fear, the rituals that gave dignity to pain. And from the realm of death we move to another place where women's secrets shaped survival, the home itself. For within households women built hidden economies of labor, food and care that sustained medieval life in ways barely recorded by history. When we think of medieval power, we picture kings with swords, lords with castles, bishops with cathedrals. But real survival, day by day, came not from thrones or altars, it came from the household. And households were the domain of women. Here, in kitchens and storerooms, in weaving rooms and dairies, women built hidden economies. They managed food, cloth, fuel, children, servants, and animals. Their work rarely appeared in chronicles, but without it, medieval society would have collapsed. This was another shocking secret medieval women carried. The household was their kingdom, and through it, they wielded quiet, indispensable power. The household as an economy. A medieval household was not just a home, it was a unit of production, consumption, and survival. Food had to be grown, stored, and prepared. Wool had to be spun, woven, and sewn. Beer had to be brewed. Animals had to be fed, milked, and butchered. Much of this labor fell to women. Noble women managed large estates, directing servants and overseeing accounts. Peasant women worked with their hands, spinning, brewing, baking, and tending gardens. In both cases, women's work was the unseen engine of the economy. What's shocking is how little of this appears in official records. A man's charter might list the rents owed, the taxes paid, but the invisible labor that made those payments possible, the spinning wheel, the butter churn, the bread oven, was left unrecorded. And yet, women knew. They carried the knowledge of how to stretch a sack of grain, how to keep ale from souring, how to patch clothes until they lasted another winter. These secrets of household management were survival itself. The hidden skills of food. Food was perhaps the most vital domain of women's hidden work. Women knew how to preserve food through salting, drying, fermenting, and pickling. They guarded recipes for stretching meals during lean years, for substituting when famine loomed. In some places women brewed ale so regularly that brewster became a common profession. Beer was not just a drink, it was a staple food, safer than water, essential for survival. And in many towns, women dominated brewing until men took over the trade. Recipes for bread, cheese, and beer were guarded as carefully as any nobleman's charter. Passed from mother to daughter, they represented generations of experiment and refinement. These were the secret sciences of survival, preserved in kitchens rather than universities. Spinning and weaving cloth, too, was a secret economy. Every garment had to be spun, woven, and sewn by hand. A single tunic might represent weeks of spinning. Spinning was so central to women's lives that it gave them their identity. Spinster, once simply a word for an unmarried woman, literally meant one who spun. It was the work that defined them. But spinning was more than labor. It was a site of knowledge exchange, of gossip, of story. As women spun, they shared secrets, passing down remedies, charms, and lore. In this way, spinning rooms became centers of hidden economies of both goods and knowledge. Managing resources beyond production, women managed resources. They knew how much grain was left for winter, how much wood was needed for fuel, how much cloth could be spared for children's clothes. Noble women kept accounts, often as carefully as any steward. Some managed entire estates during their husbands' absences, making decisions about tenants, livestock, and trade. Peasant women, too, calculated constantly what could be eaten, what must be stored, what might be sold. This management was invisible to men who wrote history, but it was central to survival. Hidden knowledge of the seasons. Women also carried deep knowledge of the seasons. They knew when to sow herbs, when to harvest flax, when to churn butter. This was not abstract knowledge. It was lived, embodied, carried in muscle memory and tradition. A woman might not read Latin, but she knew the signs of coming frost, the way milk soured in summer, the moment herbs reached their peak potency. This was knowledge men often dismissed as instinct, when in truth, it was a sophisticated science, passed down orally across generations. Secrets in objects. We see traces of this hidden household economy in the objects that survive. Spinning wheels decorated with patterns. Were they only decoration, or symbols of protection? Wooden spoons carved with charms. Chests with hidden compartments for storing valuables or herbs. These objects remind us that households were not merely domestic. They were sites of secrecy, of memory, of creativity, the silence of official history. Why do we know so little of this? Because men did not value it. Chronicles celebrated kings, not kitchens. Charters recorded rents, not recipes. Sermons spoke of women's sin, not their skill. And yet, these secrets endured because they were never meant for public record. They lived in practice, in daily labor, in the hands of women who did not need parchment to prove their worth. The 12th secret. The 12th shocking secret medieval women kept was this. They ruled hidden economies within households. They preserved knowledge of food, cloth, resources, and survival that sustained medieval life. Without their secrets, castles would have starved, villages would have withered, kingdoms would have collapsed. The household was not just domestic space, it was an invisible empire, ruled by women whose power rarely appeared in chronicles but was felt in every loaf of bread, every woven cloth, every warm hearth. And from households, our path leads to another realm where women's secrets shape survival, the world of love, sex, and intimacy, where silence, story, and ritual all converge to guard truths never meant for men's eyes. If herbs and households held women's survival secrets, then love and intimacy carried their most dangerous ones. In the medieval world, a woman's sexuality was never truly her own. It was regulated by the church, bargained by families, controlled by husbands. And yet, beneath those heavy chains of law and morality, women carried secrets of love, longing, and desire that defied the rules written for them. This chapter leads us into one of the most carefully hidden realms of medieval women's lives, the secret world of intimacy, where passion and survival often collided. Marriage as a transaction. In most cases, marriage was not about romance. It was about property, alliances, and survival. Fathers arranged unions to secure land. Lords married daughters to cement political ties. Women themselves often had little choice. And yet, within these unions, women found ways to carve private spaces. Some developed affection with their husbands. Others maintained distance, guarding their inner lives. Still others sought intimacy elsewhere, in forbidden relationships carefully concealed. The shocking truth is that even within rigid systems, women found ways to keep love and desire alive, often in places official history dared not record. Courtly love and its hidden messages. One outlet for these secret desires was the culture of courtly love. Originating in the 12th century, this tradition celebrated the devotion of a knight to a lady, usually not his wife, but a noblewoman already married. The songs of troubadours, and the poetry of courts, turned this dangerous longing into art. To men, courtly love was entertainment, a game of words. To women, it carried coded truths. The verses often spoke of longing, secrecy, and the impossibility of open expression. a lady's glance, a token hidden in clothing, a whispered promise. All these small gestures were ways women navigated passion in a world that denied their agency. In these songs, we hear faint echoes of real female voices. Women reshaping their desires into symbols, disguising truth as poetry, secrets of desire in letters. Sometimes, however, the secrecy broke through into writing. A handful of medieval women's love letters survive, startling in their intimacy. In the 12th century, the correspondence between Abelard and Heloise reveals a woman unafraid to speak of passion, even as she lived in a convent. Heloise's letters confess not only love but desire, raw, human, and utterly at odds with the ideals of chastity imposed on her. Her voice reminds us that women's longing did not vanish beneath veils and vows. It survived, hidden, until moments of honesty preserved it. The hidden world of adultery. Adultery was harshly punished in law and sermon, yet it happened. Women caught risked disgrace, punishment, even death. And so secrecy was essential. Some lovers used intermediaries, trusted servants, female friends, to carry messages. Some met in gardens, in markets, in the cover of pilgrimages. A journey to a shrine could mask a rendezvous with a lover. Folklore and chronicles both tell of these hidden affairs. They were whispered about, but rarely openly recorded. The silence surrounding them was part of their survival. Forbidden desire between women. Even more carefully hidden were relationships between women themselves. Though rarely mentioned in official records, there are scattered references. Nuns accused of inappropriate affection. Poems describing love between women. Rumors of close friendships carrying undertones of passion. These relationships were so threatening to the church that they were often erased from chronicles. Yet their faint traces suggest that women's desires extended beyond what was officially acknowledged, and that these desires too had to be guarded as secrets. Knowledge of the body. Alongside love came the secret knowledge of the body. Women knew their own rhythms, their fertility, their pleasures. Men's medical texts were filled with speculation, but women's lived knowledge was more accurate. Whispers about herbs that increased desire, or rituals to ensure conception, passed quietly among women. These secrets gave them small measures of control over lives otherwise ruled by men. Some of this knowledge survives in recipes disguised as household remedies. Spiced wine to warm the womb. Herbs said to stir the heart. To outsiders they looked innocent. To women, they were keys to intimacy, chastity belts and myths. One of the most persistent myths about medieval sexuality is the chastity belt, a device supposedly locked on women to preserve their virtue. Historians now believe these were more legend than reality, later inventions rather than common practice. But the very fact that such myths existed reveals anxieties about women's hidden desires. Men feared what women might do in secrecy. Women, meanwhile, carried the reality of those desires, unrecorded but alive. Love potions and charms. Folklore also preserves women's use of charms to inspire love. Some recipes called for herbs like vervain or basil. Others for more unsettling ingredients like drops of blood or strands of hair. Whether these potions truly worked was less important than the fact that women believed in them, and that they represented agency in shaping love. To craft a love charm was to push back against helplessness, to claim some control over fate. Of course, it was dangerous too. If discovered, such practices could bring accusations of witchcraft, and so once again, secrecy wrapped itself around women's knowledge. Why these secrets were shocking? What makes these secrets so shocking is not that women loved or desired, that is universal, but that they managed to preserve these truths in societies designed to erase them. Men wrote laws about chastity, but women carved spaces of passion. Priests preached about sin, but women whispered about herbs and charms. Families arranged marriages, but women still found ways to keep desire alive, sometimes in song, sometimes in silence, sometimes in secret. Echoes today. Even today, echoes of these medieval secrets linger. We still tell fairy tales of forbidden love, still repeat old charms and recipes said to inspire romance, still celebrate poetry born of longing. These are the shadows of medieval women's hidden desires, carried forward into our own culture. The 13th secret. So the 13th shocking secret medieval women kept was this. They guarded their hidden world of love, intimacy, and desire. They preserved passions that defied law, found freedom in stories and songs, and carried knowledge of their bodies in whispers and codes. And from love, we move to another form of hidden survival, the ways women shaped public spaces, markets, and even rebellions. For while their secrets often lived in private, sometimes they spilled into the streets, shaking the foundations of medieval order. When we think of rebellion in the Middle Ages, we picture armored knights, peasant uprisings, and bloody battles. Yet hidden beneath those grand events was another kind of rebellion, quieter, but no less powerful. Women, often invisible in official accounts, carried secrets of resistance in markets, in city streets, in taverns, and even in riots. This chapter explores how women shaped public life from the shadows, through markets, through protest, through everyday defiance. Their power was rarely acknowledged, but it was deeply felt. The marketplace as a stage. The medieval market was not only a place of trade, but of information, surveillance, and power. Women were central here. They sold bread, ale, dairy, cloth, herbs. They carried the pulse of the community in their baskets. But the marketplace was also where women staged their subtle rebellions. If prices were unfair, if merchants cheated, women spread the word quickly. Gossip could destroy a seller's reputation faster than any law. And sometimes, when gossip wasn't enough, women acted. There are records of women banding together to force fair prices, pouring out spoiled ale in public, or even seizing food during shortages. These acts were often dismissed as disorderly conduct, but in truth, they were forms of protest, secret rebellions staged in plain sight. Alewives and authority. One striking example of women's role in public life was the alewife. Brewing was originally women's work, part of household economies. But as ale became central to towns, some women expanded into selling it publicly. Alewives were powerful figures, managing production, setting prices, and controlling one of the most essential goods. They were also controversial. Churchmen condemned them for greed, officials fined them for short measures, satirists mocked them as untrustworthy. But beneath the ridicule lay unease. Alewives had authority in the marketplace. They shaped social gatherings in taverns. They decided who got drink and when. And because their work was tied to brewing herbs and fermentation, they carried knowledge men feared. In popular art, alewives were sometimes depicted with broomsticks, cauldrons, and cats, images that centuries later fed into the stereotype of the witch. But behind the satire was a truth. Women in markets carried power men did not fully control. Women in food riots. When famine struck, or prices soared, it was often women who took to the streets. Chroniclers record food riots in which women led the charge, storming bakeries, seizing grain, demanding fair measures. Why women? Because they managed households. They felt hunger first in the cries of children, in empty cupboards, in the pressure of keeping families alive. And so they acted, sometimes more boldly than men. In London, Paris, and countless villages, women's riots became flashpoints of resistance. Though rarely celebrated, these protests forced authorities to act, lowering prices, releasing hoarded grain, restoring order. The shocking secret is that medieval women were not merely passive victims of famine. They organized, protested, and rebelled, sometimes saving entire communities through their defiance. Hidden resistance in daily life. Not all resistance was dramatic. Much of it lived in daily defiance. Women might quietly shortchange a tax collector, hide grain from officials, or brew ale without paying dues. These acts of everyday resistance were rarely recorded, but they were constant. They show how women bent the rules, carving out survival within oppressive systems. A priest might thunder against disobedience from the pulpit, a taxman might record a shortfall, but neither could see the full web of hidden resistance women wove behind closed doors. Tavern culture and female-influenced taverns were another space where women's secrets shaped society. Women who ran taverns controlled more than drink, they controlled information. Gossip, deals, romances, conspiracies, all flowed through tavern doors. For men, taverns were social hubs. For women who ran them, they were sites of influence. A tavern mistress might overhear plans, spread rumors, or quietly aid rebels. Her work looked like business. In truth, it could be politics in disguise, rebellions and female figures. Though chroniclers rarely named them, women sometimes appeared in open rebellions. During the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, women were among those storming prisons and manors. In city uprisings across Europe, women joined protests armed with stones, sticks, or boiling water. Even when not recorded as leaders, they were participants. risking punishment for the sake of justice. Their silence in chronicles is not absence, but erasure. The Church's fear of disorderly women authorities feared women in the streets precisely because they embodied disorder. A quiet housewife was acceptable. A woman shouting in the market, rallying neighbors, or defying officials was dangerous. And so women's public actions were often punished more harshly. Chroniclers mocked them, courts fined them, sermons condemned them. Yet the very need to punish reveals how much power they carried. Secrets carried in song. Some protests even lived on in song. Women's chants during riots were sometimes remembered as mocking rhymes. Lines about greedy bakers or corrupt officials. These verses, carried in memory, became part of the hidden culture of resistance. Folk songs that preserved truths censored from chronicles. The 14th secret. So the 14th shocking secret medieval women kept was this. They shaped public spaces through markets, taverns, and even riots. They carried networks of resistance hidden in gossip, protest, and daily defiance. Their power was rarely acknowledged, but it was deeply felt, in every fair price forced, in every rebellion fueled, in every street where their voices rang out. And from these public spaces, we move back into the intimate realm, where women guarded another set of shocking secrets, their hidden friendships, rivalries, and bonds that shaped the private side of medieval life. So far we've explored how medieval women preserve secrets through herbs, midwifery, silence, stories, and resistance. But there is another secret, one that rarely appears in chronicles yet shaped every household, every village, every convent. It is the secret of women's relationships with one another, their friendships, their rivalries, their bonds of love and loyalty that formed the unseen fabric of daily life. For while men forged alliances through politics and war, women built alliances through trust, intimacy, and sometimes tension. These hidden bonds sustained them, shaped their choices, and carried secrets across generations. Friendship as survival. In a world where men held legal and economic power, women often relied on each other for survival. A trusted neighbor could watch children while a mother worked. A friend might share food during famine, herbs during sickness, or secrets during danger. Friendships between women were often forged in shared labor, spinning, washing, tending fields, or preparing food together. In these spaces, women's voices mingled, their laughter and complaints weaving bonds as strong as kinship. These friendships were secret treasures, sustaining women through hardships men rarely recorded. Letters between friends. In rare cases, we glimpse these bonds in letters. Some noble women wrote to one another with striking warmth, expressing affection and longing that sounds startlingly modern. A letter might read, "I think of you daily, as the sun rises and sets, and my heart aches for your company." Such lines blur the line between friendship and love, showing how deeply women valued each other's presence. The fact that these letters survive is a miracle. Most such voices were lost. But they remind us that women's friendships were not trivial, they were lifelines. Rivalries and competition. Of course, not all bonds were kind. Rivalries between women could be fierce. A wife and a mistress competing for a man's favor. A mother-in-law clashing with a daughter-in-law. Neighbors jealous of one another's prosperity. These tensions sometimes spilled into gossip or accusations. In witch trials, rivalries often surfaced, one woman accusing another out of envy or resentment. These conflicts remind us that the sisterhood of secrets was not always harmonious. Women could harm each other as well as help. But even in rivalry, secrets played a role. A whispered rumor could destroy a reputation. A revealed confidence could turn friends into enemies. The currency of women's relationships was information, guarded and exchanged with care. Bonds in convents provide another glimpse into female friendships. Though cloistered, nuns formed intense relationships, spiritual, emotional, sometimes romantic. Some wrote poetry to one another, expressing longing and devotion. Others described their bonds as soul friendships, ties deeper than blood. These relationships sustained women through strict rules and isolation, giving them emotional freedom within enclosed walls. The Church sometimes worried about these attachments, fearing they could distract from devotion. But women persisted, guarding these bonds as precious secrets. Godmothers and ritual bonds. Beyond blood and friendship, women also forged bonds through ritual. The role of godmother created lifelong ties, often closer than kinship. A godmother might protect her godchild, but also support the child's mother, sharing resources, offering advice, preserving secrets. This ritual kinship wove webs of female solidarity that stretched across households and villages, strengthening the hidden sisterhood. Shared secrets of the heart. Perhaps the most intimate bonds were those forged through shared secrets. Women confided in each other about love, about their bodies, about fears and dreams. A trusted friend might know more of a woman's true life than her husband ever would. These confidences created deep loyalty. To betray them was to sever trust. To protect them was to prove devotion. In this way, secrecy itself became a currency of friendship. Female mentorship. Older women often mentored younger ones, passing on not only skills, but wisdom. A grandmother teaching her granddaughter how to spin was also teaching her how to survive a difficult marriage, how to manage a household, how to guard her reputation. These mentorships were quiet, invisible to men, but they were among the most important legacies women carried. Women's communities beyond family. Sometimes, bonds between women created communities outside family or marriage. Widows might live together for support. Groups of women might share work, share childcare, even share living spaces. These arrangements were rarely recorded, but when they appear in fragments, they reveal alternative models of survival. Households built not on patriarchy, but on solidarity. Why these bonds were hidden? Why did women's friendships and rivalries remain secret? Because official history dismissed them as unimportant. Chronicles recorded alliances between kings, but not between milkmaids. Sermons praised obedience, not friendship. And yet, for women themselves, these bonds were life. They were the networks that provided food, care, protection, and meaning. Echoes today. We still see traces of these medieval friendships in the way women form circles of trust, book clubs, support groups, communities of mothers. The laughter, the gossip, the secrets shared over work or wine, these are echoes of spinning rooms and marketplaces centuries ago. The 15th secret. So the 15th shocking secret medieval women kept was this. Their lives were bound together in hidden webs of friendship and rivalry. They forged secret communities through loyalty, secrecy, and love. These bonds were rarely acknowledged, but they shaped survival, carrying women through joy and hardship alike. And from these friendships, we turn to one final realm of secrets. The way women preserved their wisdom for future generations. Through memory, through objects, through hidden legacies that survived long after their voices were silenced. By now, we've seen how medieval women carried secrets in herbs, songs, silence, friendship, and rebellion. But one of the most profound questions remains. How did those secrets survive? How did they cross centuries when chronicles ignored them, when priests condemned them, when laws threatened them? The answer lies in women's hidden legacies. For medieval women preserved their knowledge not in monuments or books but in memory, in objects, and in traditions so ordinary they slipped beneath notice. These legacies were the quiet threads that ensured their secrets endured long after their voices fell silent. Memory as archive above all, women relied on memory. Unlike the libraries of monasteries, their archives were living and embodied. A grandmother teaching a granddaughter how to mix herbs was preserving a text, even if no ink ever touched parchment. Lullabies carried protective charms. Recipes passed from mother to daughter carried remedies disguised as food. Folktales whispered at night carried survival lessons. This oral tradition was both fragile and resilient. Fragile, because memory could be lost in famine, plague, or persecution. Resilient, because it needed no ink, no approval, no gatekeepers. Memory traveled in breath, in gesture, in rhythm. Objects, as carriers of memory, women also preserved legacies in objects. A spindle passed down might carry not only thread but the memory of songs sung while spinning. A rosary bead worn smooth by fingers might carry prayers whispered for generations. Some households kept recipe books, stitched cloths, or prayer scrolls annotated with marginal notes. These items became family heirlooms, carriers of secrets too small to record in chronicles but too important to forget. Even jewelry and clothing sometimes bore traces of legacy. Herbs sewn into hems, charms hidden in pendants, protective stitches embroidered into fabric. These objects were silent guardians of memory. Ritual as preservation. Another way women preserved their secrets was through ritual. Lighting a candle before baking bread. Tying a ribbon to a tree at a holy well. Whispering a blessing while washing a child. These actions, repeated across centuries, became traditions. Even when the original meaning faded, the act survived. What looked like simple habit was, in truth, the echo of a medieval woman's whispered secret. Convents as archives. Convents too preserved women's legacies. Nuns copied texts, embroidered altarcloths, composed music. Within their cloisters they guarded visions, prayers and spiritual writings that carried women's perspectives in ways rarely preserved elsewhere. Though much of this output was filtered through the church, some voices survived intact. Julian of Norwich's Revelations, Hildegard of Bingen's songs, Marjorie Kempe's dictated book. These were women who refused to let their voices vanish, leaving legacies that still astonish. For every known mystic, countless anonymous nuns preserved fragments of women's thought in psalters, marginalia, and music. Their legacies were collective, not individual. Folklore as hidden legacy. Perhaps the most enduring legacy was folklore. Fairy tales, proverbs, and superstitions preserved medieval women's wisdom across centuries. When a grandmother in the 19th century told a child not to wander in the woods, she echoed medieval tales of witches and fairies. When mothers sprinkled salt to ward off misfortune, they repeated rituals carried from the Middle Ages. These legacies prove that women's secrets survived, not because they were written in chronicles, but because they lived in ordinary acts passed forward without fanfare. The disguises of legacy. What makes these legacies shocking is how well they were disguised. A nursery rhyme could be a charm. A cooking recipe could be a remedy. A superstition could be a coded survival tactic. Men dismissed these as old wives' tales. But in truth, they were libraries of female knowledge, carefully disguised, so they could survive censorship, persecution, or neglect. Silence as legacy. Even silence carried forward legacy. Families often held unspoken stories about miscarriages, forbidden loves, hidden illnesses. These silences shaped descendants as much as words. In this way, medieval women left legacies not only in what they said, but in what they chose never to reveal. Why their legacies matter. These hidden legacies matter because they remind us that history is not only written in stone and ink, it is also carried in bread, in song, in silence. The grand chronicles of kings may impress, but they often conceal as much as they reveal. The true survival of women's lives rests in the quiet legacies that slipped beneath authority's gaze, enduring in kitchens, in stories, in memory. The 16th secret. So the 16th shocking secret medieval women kept was this. They preserved their wisdom in hidden legacies, memory, objects, rituals, folklore, and silence. These legacies carried their voices forward when official history ignored them, and as we arrive here, we stand at the threshold of conclusion. For now we have uncovered 16 chapters of secrets, each carrying fragments of women's hidden world, but the final task remains, to gather them together, to reflect on what they mean, and to reveal how these quiet, shocking secrets shaped history as surely as kings and wars.
We have wandered a long road together tonight. From herb gardens and spinning rooms to convents, marketplaces, and secret friendships, we have followed the trail of medieval women's most shocking secrets. Secrets they guarded for centuries, sometimes at the cost of their lives, sometimes disguised so well they nearly disappeared. And what have we found? That beneath the grand stories of kings and battles lies another history, quieter, but no less powerful, a history built of whispers, gestures, songs, and silences. Gathering the 16 secrets, let us gather them now, one by one. First, women guarded the language of herbs, plants that healed, soothed, and sometimes controlled fertility. In gardens and kitchens, they preserved a hidden medicine that gave them power over bodies in a world ruled by men. Second, they formed secret networks of midwives, keepers of life's greatest threshold. These women carried not only skills, but rituals, blending faith and magic to guide mothers and infants through perilous hours. Third, they created coded languages in songs, charms, and embroidery. In lullabies and stitches, they disguised wisdom as beauty, ensuring survival lessons lived on in memory. Fourth, they shaped hidden worlds of faith, saints, visions, and private rituals that gave them spiritual authority beyond the control of priests. Fifth, they wrote in the margins letters, recipes, prayers, and scribbles that preserved their voices where chronicles ignored them. Their writing was small, fragile, but enduring. Sixth, they mastered silence. What they did not say became its own power, protecting secrets of the body, the household, and the soul. Seventh, they wielded beauty as armor. Through powders, perfumes, and rituals, they claimed agency over their appearance, turning cosmetics into quiet rebellion. Eighth, they carried dangerous knowledge of poisons and forbidden remedies, walking the thin line between healer and suspected witch. Ninth, they wove sisterhoods of solidarity, networks in markets, spinning rooms, and godmotherhood that carried secrets hand to hand. 10th, they preserved wisdom in stories and folklore, disguising warnings and desires in fairy tales and legends. These were the secret archives of women's history. 11th, they carried hidden rituals of suffering and death, caring for the sick, mourning the dead, and preserving dignity through pain. 12th, they ruled households as invisible kingdoms, managing food, cloth, and survival in economies unrecorded by men, but essential to life. 13th, they guarded their hidden world of love and desire, affairs, friendships, forbidden passions, carried in silence, poetry, and whispered confidences. 14th, they shaped public spaces, leading protests, riots, and market resistance that forced justice when authorities failed. 15th, they built bonds of friendship and rivalry, webs of trust and tension that sustained communities beyond the reach of men's authority. 16th, they preserved their legacies in memory, ritual, and folklore, ensuring their secrets outlasted persecution and silence, echoing even into our own time. The power beneath the silence. Taken together, these 16 secrets reveal something astonishing. Medieval women were never passive. They were not silent victims in shadows of castles and churches. They were creators of parallel systems, of medicine, of memory, of faith, of resistance. Their power lay not in armies or laws, but in subtler forms. A recipe disguised as a meal, a charm hidden in a lullaby, a silence that protected truth better than any fortress. It is shocking because it overturns the image of medieval women as powerless. They were not powerless. They were subtle, strategic, and resilient, surviving in ways official history was never meant to notice. Why these secrets survived? Why did these secrets last for centuries? Because they were hidden in plain sight. Men dismissed women's songs as gossip, their remedies as superstition, their stories as fables. And yet, those very dismissals allowed the traditions to survive unnoticed. What was underestimated became unstoppable, the echoes today. And perhaps most astonishing of all, these secrets still echo. Every grandmother's home remedy, every lullaby hummed without remembering its origin, every fairy tale whispered to a child at night, every ritual act, lighting a candle, tucking lavender into a drawer, making bread with a cross on top. These are faint traces of medieval women's hidden legacies. Their secrets never fully died. They live in us, woven so deeply into culture we barely notice. The lesson of the secrets. What, then, do these secrets teach us? That history is not only what is written by kings and priests, it is also what is carried in whispers, what is hidden in songs, what is preserved in memory. That silence does not mean absence. That small acts, brewing, spinning, singing, comforting, are not trivial. They are the foundations of survival, and that the true measure of power is not always what can be seen, but what endures unseen. The final secret. Perhaps, then, there is a 17th secret, one hidden even deeper, that women's power has always been underestimated, precisely because it was invisible. The Middle Ages were not only the time of knights and kings, they were also the time of women weaving secrets into the very fabric of daily life. And though they lived in silence, their voices carried forward, finding us centuries later. Closing. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, remember them. The midwives whispering prayers in darkened rooms, the mothers singing charms as lullabies, the sisters preserving remedies in recipes, the women protesting in markets, spinning secrets into stories, carrying legacies in silence. Their lives were filled with danger, yet they survived. Their voices were silenced, yet they spoke. Their secrets were hidden, yet they endured. And in the end, it is their endurance, the quiet, shocking endurance of medieval women's secrets, that may be the greatest legacy of all. So close your eyes now and let their whispers guide you. For even in silence, their stories live, and tonight you have heard them.